Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'm going to be covering the weather for June 3rd of 2023. This forecast is coming a little bit late, but I do think it is relevant enough for me to cover, even if there's not going to be all that much of a tornado threat. So our threats today are mainly going to be a marginal threat for the eastern United States into New England, covering much of an area between New England and the eastern United States, as well as a marginal threat for parts of Texas and Louisiana, as well as a slight risk along the Texas-Mexican border, which is expected to happen or bring severe weather a little bit later in the afternoon today. Continuing from now into probably the very late hours of tonight, as well as a marginal threat that extends all the way up across western Texas into New Mexico. So that's mainly what we're looking at for our severe weather threats across much of the United States. Today is a little bit of a weird day, because we do have all these marginal threats, but we don't have all that much of a tornado threat in any locations. We do have a 5% wind threat for that marginal threat back up north, as well as a 5% for that marginal threat down here, and a 5% for the rest of the marginal threat in Texas, as well as a 15% for the one further down south. As for our hail threat, the marginal threat for Louisiana and Texas, there is no hail threat. We could see the possibility of some very small hail, though. Possibly up to medium-sized. Then back over here, we do have the possibility of a 5% hail threat, but I'm thinking it's going to be a little bit unlikely, probably allowing for mostly the possibility of some very small hail, as well as a 5% overall for that marginal threat, not including a increased like 15% for the slight risk area. It's just a 5% for the entirety of that marginal and slight risk area. Taking a look at our pivotal weather models, the subtropical jet from the Pacific Ocean has dropped further down south because this low pressure system situated over the Rockies is beginning to weaken and isn't pulling the jet stream further north anymore. It's just going across southern Texas to trigger severe weather development, but it is relatively weak, so wind shear is expected to be relatively weak. And further back up north, we don't really have all that much of a triggering factor, except for this small shortwave trough coming out of Canada. This is expected to trigger some isolated and scattered rain showers with possibly a little bit of severe potential to them. But then further down south for this marginal threat, in particular across eastern Texas and Louisiana, this is mostly going to be leftover convection from yesterday. The deep moisture down there and a little bit of instability is going to help prolong convection. There's not really a fueling trigger for that. So that's currently what we're looking at. But because of how weak the jet stream is and how there's not really a lot of triggering factors across the United States, severe weather potential the next few days going into Sunday and Monday and possibly Tuesday are likely going to be very little. In fact, the day 3 outlook from the SPC has no marginal threat, no slight risk, absolutely nothing, just a TSTM threat. Taking a look at our 700 millibars, I do want to touch on this a little bit. We're not really seeing all that much notable low-level winds to help aid in severe weather development anywhere across the United States, except for the northeastern marginal threat. This could potentially allow for some moderate to weak wind shear and help organize some severe weather development. Wind shear is expected to be relatively weak, so tornadic possibilities are going to be very little, as well as overall CAPE being very small. So I just want to touch a little bit on this. Taking a look at the dew points, keeping in mind all marginal threats across the United States in that little slight risk area, let's first start with the marginal threat that's back down towards southern Texas with that small slight risk. Dew points are expected to be in the mid-60s to possibly the upper 60s and possibly even the very low 70s in some areas across the coast. This is going to help with instability with whatever lapse rates we have, and our lapse rates I will show you those later, but it's going to help keep Cape values possibly in the 1000s to 270 range, possibly higher, possibly even the low 3000s. Taking a look at the marginal threat further in Louisiana and eastern Texas, dew points in the mid 60s to low 60s is going to help with instability, probably somewhere in the 1000s to 2050 range with whatever lapse rates we have. Also being blown downwind, so this is going to help prolong convection across the Texas and Louisiana area. However, back towards the marginal threat further in the New England area across the eastern United States coast, their dew points are relatively in the weaker side to the upper 50s in some areas, but mostly in the mid 50s. This is going to provide the potential for some moderately strong Cape in some areas, depending on our lapse rates. Taking a look at our lapse rates, first starting on the slight risk down south, lapse rates do appear to be sufficient enough in the 7s and 8s to possibly allow for those 1000s to 2700 range, and possibly again the weak 3000s. Lapse rates do definitely look sufficient enough for that. However, back towards the Texas and Louisiana area, lapse rates in the 6s, not even in the 7s, are going to keep Cape values probably in the weaker moderates 1000s to 2000s range, probably not as strong as down in Texas. However, the strong dew point should keep it in the moderates range, but not enough to help trigger severe weather development, just prolong it over time because of the lack of a development trigger. But further up north in the New England and eastern United States coast area, lapse rates in the 6s to upper 6s, possibly the weak 7s in some areas, is going to help Cape values stay in the triple digits, possibly in the 1000s range, most likely not in the 2000s range in any areas. However, we could possibly see some simulated values of that, but anywhere in the 2000s range realistically is going to be unlikely. Taking a look at the instability across the United States, focusing on the New England area in the eastern United States coast marginal threat first, you do see a little bit of 2000s to begin with, but then looking forward, Cape values mostly do stay in the 1000s range to triple digits. You don't really see a lot in the yellows, which would resemble the 2000s. So Cape values are expected to stay mostly in the triple digits to 1000s range. This is going to support weaker end convection, not really strong explosive supercells, but definitely some rain showers and possibly some large hail, depending on if it wants to develop. However, weak wind shear probably won't allow for it. But damaging winds are definitely possible across the next few days for the eastern United States area. But then let's take a look at the Louisiana area. Cape values are in the a little bit higher than what we're seeing in the New England and eastern United States coast threat, mostly in the 1000s to 2000s range, not really a lot in the 2050s range. And definitely not in the 3000s range. This is only going to be enough to possibly support in prolonged convection, not really help it develop over time. This is going to possibly allow for some small hail across the Texas and Louisiana area, possibly in Arkansas as well. But again, tornadoes are unlikely with weak wind shear. This could also allow for some strong damaging wind gusts, but main threats are going to be small to medium-sized hail, as well as possibly large hail as well as some damaging gusts. But then taking a look at the Texas threat area, Cape values do mostly stay in the possibly the low 3000s, but definitely in the 1000s to 2700 range. In some simulated values in some areas, there is the 3000s, but 3000s definitely could be possible, but it's going to be very isolated to some areas. But as convection actually enters the United States after developing in Mexico in those possibly the 4000s and 3000s, as it enters the United States, it does enter more weaker Cape values in the 2050 range to the 1000s range. This is going to support some damaging wind gusts as well as some large hail. Taking a look at the wind shear first, us looking at the slight risk area in Texas, as well as that marginal threat surrounding it, mainly focusing on the Rio Grande Valley area. You can see that wind shear does develop in the wake of the storm systems. There is a QLCS moving through the area. It's likely going to be in a linear configuration instead of an isolated and scattered thunderstorm configuration, so any wind shear would have to be on the outflow boundary for tornadic development, and any wind shear you see is likely going to be very weak and also in the wake of the convection. So looking at this storm system, if you look very closely down south, this is the outflow boundary on that QLCS, and notice there is absolutely no wind shear ahead of it. It is very, very weak, so any wind shear is going to be unusable to the QLCS, and embedded tornadoes are going to be unlikely. But then let's take a look at the Louisiana and Texas area threat. There is pretty much no wind shear at all because there is no strong mid-level or low-level winds moving through the area to help trigger the strong wind shear. So any tornadic development with that moderate cape is going to be unlikely. But then taking a look at the marginal threat back towards the New England area across the eastern coast, with that very weak cape and very weak wind shear, tornadoes are going to be very unlikely because there's pretty much very, very weak wind shear. Any wind shear is likely going to be developed across the Appalachian Mountains, and not going to allow for any tornadic possibilities over the next few days across the New England and eastern coast area. So tornadoes again are likely going to be very unlikely the next few days. Then let's take a look at the tropical storm Arlene. I'm not sure if I covered it in my last forecast, but I'm pretty sure I did. However, yesterday Arlene was updated to a tropical storm. Now it has decreased to a post-tropical remnant. This is likely not going to pose all that much of a threat to the rest of the United States anymore. Possibly a little bit of damaging wind gusts as well as some heavy rain to the Florida Keys is possible. However, ejected severe thunderstorms across Florida is likely not going to be possible. So Arlene is likely not going to have all that much of effect on the United States anymore. However, it will likely have an effect on Cuba. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. And hopefully I will see you guys tomorrow with a weekly overlook.